Welcome to the Tuesday, September 6th edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Joe Bartel. You can follow me at JB Fantasy Sports. Alongside me, as always, is Jake Letarski. It's finally time, everyone. We are days before the regular season. We've been doing all these podcasts, different topics and things like that to get us ready for this moment. We can discuss the waiver wire pickups, which will be happening each and every Tuesday moving forward. Looking forward to going over those guys with you. A few waiver wire guys right now that you need to consider week 0 for your teams. Before we do that, we'll just make sure we can step away for a second and get everything going correctly. Jake, it's finally here. I mean, we have finally gotten to this point. Again, the regular season starts officially Thursday. I always want to say it's the Rams and Buccaneers because that was last year, but we have the Bills and Rams this time around. Going to be a fantastic game.
Matchup.
Yeah, couldn't be a better start to the regular season. But we are here and we are ready to get going again every week moving forward. Every Tuesday, Jake, you and I will be discussing all the waiver wire pickups that help you win your fantasy leagues.
I'm just pumped. I'm happy to get back to the bread and butter, the meat and potatoes. This is our show. You know, we start this thing in July and try to do these 101 shows, you know, to satisfy all of our wonderful sponsors and whatnot. But this is the show that I've been doing. I think this is our third year together. I've been doing this waiver wire show for 5 or 6 years, pretty much since the very beginning. It's one of the football media things that I've hung on to because, well, one, it helps me personally with my own waiver wire, right? You know, if I got to run fab for 9 different leagues on, you know, every Tuesday night, we got you here. But also it makes sure I'm thorough and doing the most research and you know, sweeping everywhere. Just, you know, we're going to say a lot of names. Not always are we going to be super high on a name, but we want to make you aware of all the names that are out there, give you all the facts, and allow you to do the to do your own research and hopefully set you up for success. Because while the draft is the most fun part of the season, the waiver wire is where leagues are won and lost. So we're going to go through position by position. In general, we want to keep our recommendations to guys that are less than 50% rostered, using Yahoo, you know, one of our main sponsors and partners, and ESPN as well, one of our main partners, as the baseline there. So we'll check in. If they're under 50% rostered in those 2 leagues, fair game, we'll fire away. But of course, you know, we know some of you guys are in 8-10 team leagues too, and fire away at the questions in the chat. Get at us on Twitter, because there might be some guys out there on the wire that are, you know, 60-70% rostered in the more traditional formats. There were some surprising names under our 50% threshold that we'll definitely get to today. So I'm looking forward to running through these down position by position. But I think first you got one of those wonderful sponsors to rep us with.
I was going to say it's important because, you know, when you have done your draft, waiver wire can be completely different. We did a bunch of drafts while we were in Vegas in the beginning of August, right? The waiver wire then might be different than if you did a draft 2 weeks ago. So while this information might be redundant for some, I think it's overall important to kind of recap all that stuff.
Absolutely. And I know, you know, I have TweetDeck up while I'm looking at these shows, and Peter Schenke just tweeted, you know, he did the top 150 overall from our magazine. And he said that only one, really, Tim Patrick, he called it the healthiest preseason really that he can ever remember. And that is truly the case. I'm thinking that the other day, no first round picks, you know, ended up getting
no J.K.
injured.
Dobbins and Gus Edwards.
Yeah, exactly. Who are both injured anyway, which we'll get to in a little bit. But, you know, it's been a crazy healthy preseason. So you'd think maybe less names than normal. There weren't a ton of huge names to get cut or a ton of big time late free agent signings, but there were a couple depth chart surprises, some backups that you should at least be on your radar if your league offers a watch list feature, things like that. So hopefully we'll help you get that built.
Yeah. All right. And you mentioned those sponsors. Let's get to them. So Huffer proudly brings you fantasy sports in your complete control. Goodbye are the days of salary caps and house-based games. Instead, say hello to simple fan-made custom contests. On Huffer, you create contests on your own. You'll pick the entry fee. You pick the number of seats. You pick the athletes. You pick the stats. You pick it all. Choose between one of Huffer's 12 different gameplays, then set the basic contest terms and write the multiple choice questions, which can be easy as more passing yards, Mahomes or Brady. Let your sports imagination run wild. It's only contests made by fans for fans on Huffer. All contests feature live leaderboards to track your progress during the game and full player transparency to see who are competing against each other. Unlock a $50 deposit and earn an additional $10 for each friend you invite. It's a whole new world in the DFS game, and Huffer is ahead of the pack. So don't wait. Download HOFR, again, Huffer, HOFR, and challenge your friends today. Jake, let's get into the quarterback conversation. Again, in particular, this will be important for the super flex leagues, the 2 QB leagues, but we'll try to identify which ones are more roster than others in the different formats that we're basing this off, just to give you some direction on these pickups.
Exactly. That's the beauty of fantasy football, and that's part of the reason that we get to stay in business is because there are so many different league formats, so many ways to play here. So we're definitely going to get you settled, in 2 quarterback leagues. There are definitely some deep 2 quarterback leagues. There are, some dynasty formats that have really tight quarterback situations. And, of course, then there are your standard redraft leagues where guys just with a good matchup might be someone that you want to look at. Now, I'm not necessarily saying go and, bench Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes necessarily, but there are some quarterbacks out there. For example, 2 of them come right to mind here, and those are Jameis Winston, who's 46% rostered at Atlanta, and Matt Ryan, 44% rostered at Houston. I mean, Atlanta last year, I'll start with Jameis Winston. You have to imagine the situation around him is much better. There's no Kamara suspension yet. He's getting Michael Thomas back. He's got a rookie in Olave that should be helpful. He's got another free agent signing in Jarvis Landry that should be helpful to some degree. And he's got plenty of weapons. He's always going to, he'll be a turnover risk as always, but 46% at Atlanta is about as good as you're going to get for a stream. Now, granted, most people, unless they completely punted quarterbacks in their draft, which is a completely viable strategy, most people don't have to worry about streaming week 1, but you can do a whole lot worse than Jameis Winston week 1 for sure.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I will be posting this, not today, but maybe tomorrow or Thursday. I do that full rundown of all the different players I have rostered across my leagues and the percentages of. We've joked now for the past couple of weeks, Kyle Pitts is going to be completely on the top of that. He is. I only added more to that this past week in drafts. But Jameis Winston actually is going to be a sneaky most rostered QB for me. It's been a QB2, and you think about the super flex leagues that we've done or discussed, deeper leagues like that, I'm fine. I know I actually have some optimism the Falcons will be better. We talked about the over-under win-loss totals last week, and I think the Falcons will be fine. Their defense isn't good. The one reason I actually like Jameis Winston this week as well, the Saints defense isn't all that good. They lost 2 critical secondary pieces this past week. I think the over-under for that game Mario and I had talked about on Friday's SiriusXM show was like 42.5. I'm taking the over on that, depending on if the line hasn't changed much significantly, because I think both offenses are actually going to be pretty good. So Winston, he might sneak into that low end QB1 play for me this week, even though you want to really mess things around.
I was just surprised to see his name on the list. I wouldn't be shocked in the least bit if he finishes a top 15 quarterback. That doesn't necessarily mean the Saints will be above 500 and go to the playoffs, but he can easily be a top 15 fantasy quarterback there. And just, for a real life dilemma, here's an example. Dak Prescott, I have. It's going to be Dak or Jameis in one league. Do I take Dak at home against Tampa Bay or Jameis on the road against the Falcons? That suddenly becomes a very interesting decision, and I'm trying not to overthink it week 1. I'll probably still go Dak, but Jameis makes a very compelling case here for me.
Yeah, I completely agree. You want to move on to a few of these guys. Matt Ryan is one that I've been interested in particular. Matt Ryan's going against the Houston Texans this week. Say what you want about the Texans and Davis Mills and Brandon Cooks. Still one of the worst teams in the league. Their defense is particularly bad. And the Colts, we think, are going to be pretty good. We had the Michael Pittman thing, who are all over right now with Jake, which is great.
Target machine.
And I think Matt Ryan's going to improve that offense overall. What are his figures going to be, though? Because this is still a run-oriented offense and a defense that's pretty good.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, Matt Ryan, number 2, not just because he's slightly less rostered, but I think he'll be a fine quarterback this year. He should definitely be. I took him as my 3rd quarterback in a 10-team super flex after getting both Allen and Jalen Hurts early on last night. So I like both of those guys plenty. The only risk that would rank Ryan number 2 in streamers this week is, your blowout factor and having this be a big Jonathan Taylor heavy game. But again, if you're a believer in the Texas offense, this is something you may want to consider.
From the second tier of these waiver wire QBs, the Mac Joneses, Daniel Jones, Jared Goff of the world, is there one that you like more than the other?
It gets tough to see to me. Mac Jones, Daniel Jones, these guys are all on a pretty similar playing field. I kind of like the Baker Mayfield revenge game narrative, although I could see that going very, very wrong. I also, again, this would. He's lower on the ownership spectrum here, but Carson Wentz is only 12% rostered, and he's one of the few teams. He's one of the few teams that is at home among these streamers here that doesn't on the road, and he gets the Jaguars, who of course we don't think particularly highly of. So I would be maybe more inclined to pick up Carson Wentz over someone like Tannehill this week, for example.
Well, that's fair. I actually like the Daniel Jones play, especially with Harold Landry done for the season for the Titans. They're star pass rusher. Now, the Titans' defense is still fine enough, and I know they were the number one AFC team last year. They're also one of the more faker teams, at least of the number one seeds that I can recall. And I'm a Packers fan. I'm aware of fake number one teams. I'm not certain the Titans are that good. In fact, I think we both took the under on their win total this year. I don't think they make the playoffs. And while I'm less certain the Giants are going to be all that good because they made some questionable decisions, right? Blake Martinez was cut this past week. It seems like they are going the opposite direction of competing. This is still a good spot for all those pass catchers of the Giants to be able to pop off. I'm not going to be going out there and recommending Daniel Jones in basic 12-team leagues, but I do think he's a decent enough super flex option, and he's available at 26% rostered, across the league. You mentioned Baker Mayfield. Let's talk about Baker a little bit more, and also the, I guess, surprising news that occurred for some yesterday that Mitchell Trubisky, your boy, Mitchell Trubisky, was named the starter for the Steelers.
My boy, yes.
Yeah, I was operating under the assumption Trubisky was going to be the starter for the Steelers since day one.
Yes, absolutely.
And the third string reps Kenny Pickett was getting in the preseason didn't convince me otherwise. So I guess for the people out there who are shocked by that, pull your head out of here somewhere, because that was not that big of a surprise.
Exactly.
I think Trubisky actually is kind of a sleeper low-end QB2 type of option, but I also think, like you mentioned, Baker Mayfield, revenge game. I feel more confident he'll do fine. The Browns are a dysfunctional mess. They're out without Deshaun Watson. Yeah. I think Baker Mayfield will produce enough to be able to start in Superflex formats pretty comfortably.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of these, that we're going to talk about on this whole list, it is just housekeeping for your 14-team Superflex type leagues here. Baker Mayfield, of course, if you drafted in June, you didn't know that, Baker Mayfield was going to go over there and win the starter's job. You had no way of knowing that. And he was likely off your maybe still a borderline top 40, 45 quarterback, but mostly off the fantasy radar because you just didn't know what was happening. Trubisky, like you said, he's, barely sneaking in the top 30 here, but, for a lot of fantasy leagues, but he's someone that, will become relevant in those 14-team Superflex leagues. I mean, I've got plenty. I shouldn't say plenty. I've got enough Deontay Johnson and a little bit of Chase Claypool this year that I don't want to contradict myself and say Mitch Trubisky will be completely trash. But those guys have been able to be successful with the ghost of Ben Roethlisberger. So Trubisky, I think he maybe takes the Najee Harris value down just a tick. Because he'll be more likely to take off and run. I think he'll be fine enough to get you 15, 20 fantasy points in a game. No issues there.
Yeah, and Trubisky is more likely to throw a pass longer than 5 yards, which would hurt Najee Harris and Deontay Johnson. I actually think, maybe this is a crazy take, Jake. You can tell me if I'm wrong. I think Mitch Trubisky is better than what Roethlisberger was over the last 2 years, but certainly last year.
It's certainly possible.
So this is going to improve the offense, and I think by default, even if Najee Harris loses some touches, loses some of that volume, he might make up for it in efficiency. At least that's my
he spent those years with the Bears and Matt Nagy, and then he was a backup. And Mike Tomlin might be the first time he has the opportunity to start for a competent organization. So I guess you have to give him the benefit of the doubt a little bit.
I agree. Cool to move on to the running backs?
Yeah, just one last bullet point here, I guess. Zach Wilson for the Jets still hasn't technically been ruled out for week 1. So again, you have to be in a pretty deep league if you're thinking about doing that. But it's looking like maybe less of a chance to be able to stream Joe Flacco this week.
Yippee, if you're really looking forward to that. Let's pause, take a break, and give a word for our sponsors here from Blue Wire. The video audience will be right back. But yeah, for the audio, it'll take a little bit of time here. So, okay, so we're back. Running backs in particular now. Our cover boy for this, at least on the YouTube side of things, we're looking for those thumbnails. Raheem Mostert. Interesting name now after the Dolphins released Sony Michel during the waiver wire cutdowns. Michel obviously signed with the Chargers. He's another name that we could probably talk about a little bit later on as well too. I'm not convinced Raheem Mostert's going to be the guy for the Dolphins, but it's not like Chase Edmonds is either. And they also have the guys like Myles Gaskin around too that can complicate this matter. Are you just staying away from the Dolphins backfield altogether, or how are you looking at this?
I know you were a big Chase Edmonds guy, and I didn't completely disagree with that necessarily, but this was a backfield that I've actually stayed away from pretty much entirely here, mostly because I can't know enough to make a confident decision here. And I know there are some very smart minds in the fantasy industry that are boasting having more Mostert exposure than any other player, dating back to early best balls. And I can see the logic based on what once was with Mostert, but people forget that he's 30 years old right now. I think he's not much more than a timeshare back at best. And he's also 53% rostered. So out of all these guys that we're talking about here, He's the least likely to be available. I think we have a couple better options to look at for both week 1 and for beyond. So I don't want to rip on Mostert too much. Maybe I'm missing something a little bit here, but I don't know what kind of split we're going to have here with these players. And as a result, I'm not rushing to blow fab on him, too early.
Yeah, I'm with you on the Mostert thing. And I also believe Edmonds is going to be good. Like, I have him in 2 leagues. I don't feel great about it, mind you, but I have him in 2 leagues where he is going to be my running back too. And that will be fine enough in full point PPR formats. Mostert, when healthy, is explosive. I'm not positive Tua is going to be doing enough from a quarterback perspective to open up those lanes for Mostert to have that opportunity. We'll have to see. Mm-hmm. Baltimore Ravens backfield was a question mark last year, might still be a question mark this year as well too. Gus Edwards, we know, at least for certain, will be out for at least the first 4 games. He's been placed on the PUP list for the Ravens. However, J.K. Dobbins and his battle with the media, of all people, saying that he will be healthy. And then John Harbaugh, like, no, he actually won't be healthy. We're not positive what's going to happen.
What was the deal? He got mad that they asked him the question?
On multiple occasions, Dobbins has dunked on reporters like Ian Rappaport and others saying, no, I will be ready for week 1. You are wrong for reporting this information and your sources are stupid. I mean, that's been direct quotes from Dobbins, but yet here we are days away from the start of week 1, and we don't know if Dobbins is going to be healthy. So what does that mean for the backfield?
Yeah, so it's just a matter of last man standing, really, at this point, right? Now, I know they signed Kenyon Drake, and pretty late, which kind of was the first clue that something might be up with these guys, right? And I know they also still have Justice Hill, who is a guy that people thought could maybe emerge in the last couple of years. We wrote a nice update on him that's ready to break out, ready to make an impact in year 4. I'm not quite buying that necessarily yet, but it's a last man standing situation right now. And that last man standing happens to be Mike Davis. And if you don't remember, of course, it's easy to forget a little bit because he's got, the generic name, right? Mike Davis. But he has been productive in the past. He's had some good games, good years, or some good games for the Bears is who stands out for me. Of course, he kind of lost touches to Cordero Patterson last year. So, maybe that's why he's become an afterthought. But the year before, in 2020 with the Panthers, basically when McCaffrey went down, if you picked up Mike Davis, you didn't see that much of a drop off, at least for those first 6 weeks. He was a very productive, viable player early on in the season. And I think he could be the same for week 1 in Baltimore. Now, there's one running back whose long-term outlook I like a little more, that I was a little bit surprised at his roster numbers. But if you just need someone week 1, for example, if you do have Dobbins, or if you get a guy that shows up on the injury report late this week, we'll find out. Stay tuned to RotoWire. We'll hook you up. But if you get a guy that shows up late, Mike Davis seems to be the guy that's going to go out and get the most touches at the running back position. And, they get a pretty nice matchup here. It's the Jets, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah, so that they're going to be favored against the Jets. This should be a positive revenge game. Yes, this should be a positive game script there. And so Mike Davis only 26% rostered, so there's a good chance he's out there. I mean, if you drafted Labor Day weekend here, there's not a half bad chance that he was taken, for those reasons.
Oh, sure. I was going to ask. I have J.K. Dobbins in a plethora of leagues, probably more than half a dozen at this point. If Dobbins were to miss week 1, how much do you think I should be putting from a waiver wire perspective down?
This is one of the most challenging questions that we're going to have to answer, because you're looking at a short-term Band-Aid here. So
quite literally, possibly 1 week.
Yeah, it's literally a 1-week Band-Aid. So I don't think I would spend more than 12% of your fab. But the problem is if that is your only hole in your lineup, right? If you left RB2 completely vacant, or you did a 0 RB strategy and you don't have a better option, you might actually have to go more to get him, because, week 1, everybody's antsy, everyone's over analyzing, right? Everyone's paying more attention week 1 than they will any other week of the season here. They'll see Mike Davis, the starting running back, out there, and they might bid up to $18, $20, which to me isn't a good strategy. If you have to bid that much to get him, I'd be looking at other options on the waiver wire, and hopefully we'll give you some here.
Yeah, the helpful part is that they did sign Kenyon Drake, who I don't think is very good anymore, but that might do just enough to take away bids on Mike Davis if the inevitable were to occur and Dobbins weren't playing week 1. Again, we don't know that information. We're doing this podcast on Tuesday. You can certainly check back with us on Twitter on Thursday or Friday, or certainly everywhere else on the RotoWire platform.
I just know a lot of the default waiver wire fab is going to run on Tuesday. I know we have a couple leagues running on Wednesday and Thursday too. So we just want to lay out all the names, hopefully, and make the workday a little better and give you some options to look at.
Yep. J.D. McKissick, another one interesting, at least from a full point PPR perspective, rostered already in 30% of the league. So he might
30% is shocking to me. I just can't believe 30%. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's probably because I'm taking him in every league that I'm in.
It's
more or less
exactly.
In the full
it's 30% because of Joe, because of all the Joe leagues. And hey, and I'm taking him too. I have him in a couple leagues, a couple best balls. Obviously, you have the Brian Robinson unfortunate situation. We really have absolutely no idea that, if or when Brian Robinson's going to come back and play this season. No real precedent for that injury. And of course, that leaves Antonio Gibson. And Antonio Gibson has almost been like the Jamar Chase of this year's preseason. He's fumbling. He's not he's not picking it up. And, I think I'm overcorrecting actually with that whole situation because I didn't get any Jamar Chase last year. I didn't believe it. And it turned out to be a complete 180. So I'm overcorrecting and actually getting myself some Gibson. I mean, they had him out there returning kicks in the preseason, which is like the worst sign you could have for a running back that you want to have any fantasy viability. So there's a lot of hate, a lot of narrative going around with Antonio Gibson. I still believe that he is the best, talent in that backfield if he can get these fumbling issues under control. But if you were a hater on Gibson before the Robinson injury, why would you not absolutely love J.D. McKissic? This is a guy who caught 80 passes a couple seasons ago. So he's just going to be a darling in PPR leagues, and he'll actually have a good role in that offense here. And the Washington defense, the defensive line is pretty solid, even though they didn't
still hurt.
Yeah, you're right. Good point. Even though they didn't quite live up to expectations defensively last year, I think the Washington Commanders are going to see more negative game script where they're going to have to use their third down back to play a little bit of catch up. And we'll see what kind of mobility Wentz has anymore. At this stage in his career after all the injuries. Wasn't it him with the Colts that sprained both his ankles on the same play in Week 1 last year?
For who? J.D. McKissic?
No. Carson Wentz.
Oh,
so I'm trying to illustrate a point about his possible lack of mobility and using the check down. Yeah, using the check down. But in any case, I would much rather pay $6 in Fab and scoop up McKissic this week for a long-term asset than I would to pay $12 in Fab for a Band-Aid with Mike Davis is what I'm saying. And I would argue that McKissic at 30%, that was shocking to me. He'd be my top pickup this week.
Okay, that's fair. We had mentioned the Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett news. There was actually a little bit of depth chart news outside of the quarterback stuff for the Steelers. It's Jalen Warren actually being listed as the top backup to Najee Harris in that situation. You mentioned Najee Harris maybe loses some workload. He had an insane workload last year where if he had injury issues as a result, it would not be surprising to me at all. To have Jalen Warren come out of nowhere and now be listed as the backup for the Steelers is really interesting. There were some smart podcasts 3 or 4 weeks ago that have been sniffing around this, and Warren certainly profiles as an electric athlete, so it's not really a surprise. But he's at 2% roster right now, and you had mentioned J.D. McKissic as your top pickup. I'm going ahead and taking Jalen Warren in any of the NFFC contests or the super deep leagues that we have where a guy like that could really pay off, I think, substantially.
Yeah, especially if you don't necessarily need a running back to field the lineup Week 1 and maybe you drafted in July or, I don't know, one of my leagues, it was a 14-teamer I did in June. There are guys that are already complete dead weight, and you might as well pick up someone with some upside because Jalen Warren wasn't even on the radar at that point. His emergence, if you will, has basically led to Benny Snell being completely fantasy irrelevant. And, the draft profile I was listening to Jeff Sneaky Ads the other day. He mentioned that, Warren kind of slow for what you want a running back to be in these days, 4.55. I mean, I don't know where 4.55 is considered slow, but I just think about what I ran in high school. But
you were an offensive lineman,
yes,
right?
Yes, exactly. Okay. So like 7-8 seconds, that wasn't too bad, right? No. But anyway, Jalen Warren, 2% rostered. And the magic Liz Frank words have been associated with Najee Harris. He seems to have him and the Steelers beat reporters. They've gotten in touch with Jeff. They've made it very clear that it's something that he is over. But to hear those magic words with Harris make me think, especially if I'm the one who used a first-round draft pick on Harris, I should absolutely be getting myself some Jalen Warren right now, especially if that happened, months ago before any word of this injury surfaced.
Yeah, so again, I have Najee Harris in the Beat Joe Bartel NFFC. I am bidding on Jalen Warren right now. I think the NFC waivers run, typically Wednesday, Thursday. Yep. I put a $50 bid on it right now. It's a $1,000 budget.
Yeah, I was going to say, so that's a 5%. Yep.
Right. I think I might have to go higher. Like the more I'm thinking about this talk and more podcasts, sites are picking up on this, that he's going to be the backup of the Steelers.
Yeah.
Sometimes that sneaks in on week one in your friends and family league. If it's deeper, you can make that work. But I think in sharper leagues like that, it might be a little bit higher than that.
No, you're absolutely correct. I think a lot of the standard 12-team leagues, you might throw 1 or 2% out there just to have a stab at them and replace roster dead weight. But if you're trying to insure Najee Harris, which, if you were trying to handcuff Harris in a draft 2 months ago, you were definitely taking Benny Snell. Warren wasn't even on the radar. Now it might be worth spending up a little bit to make sure you have that backup.
There's kind of just a flotsam of backups overall, so let's go over them real quick. So, Benjamin now listed as top backup for the Cardinals behind James Conner. Well, that's important because James Conner has had injury problems throughout his career. In fact, it was surprising that he was healthy at all last season and remained healthy. He's not going to have Chase Edmonds be able to take over that workload for him. We're going to have to see if Benjamin fits in or if it is more of just James Conner doing James Conner stuff. You have Zamir White now listed as a top backup for the Raiders. Of course, they cut Kenny Drake. There was Amir Abdullah, which raise your hand if you remember where he was from. That's a second-round pick for the Lions back in 2013.
Was it Nebraska?
Yes. Yeah, I'm surprised Amir Abdullah is even in the league anymore, so I was shocked.
He's floated around for a long time.
We were even saying
Brandon Bolden's on this roster, too, if we remember him with the Patriots.
Josh McDaniels has got some question marks. And then there's also Rex Burkhead, who's officially the backup for the Texans.
Someone took Rex Burkhead in my 10-team league last night, and I was like, wait a minute, what are you doing? Is that just the guy that you know?
They forgot Damon Pierce.
Yes. No, I took Damon Pierce. Everybody forgot about him. But,
I was going to say, so 3 weeks ago, I would have thought Damon Pierce would be a guy that we'd talk on the podcast. But since Marlon Mack was cut and Pierce was named the starter for the Texans, he's not only not a waiver wire pickup, he was a guy that's going in the 5th or 6th round in drafts, which is
I
way
still
too
think
high.
he was around like a 12th round pick if we go back to June. I should research that a little bit.
Yes.
He still is being taken because I don't think anybody thought really that Marlon Mack was going to come in and be the bell cow there, and maybe more so in best balls than leagues that were drafting early. But obviously, if Damon Pierce is out on the waiver wire, he's a 75% of your budget or greater type guy.
Is there any one of those true backups that we mentioned that you're interested in all?
Beyond Warren, I think Warren has the most upside. The rest of them might be a little bit injury dependent for me.
Okay, I tend to agree too. And if I was looking at more backups, it is Jalen Warren or it is whoever the technical backup is behind Joe Mixon for the Bengals. These offenses, whether it be Zamir White and the Raiders or Rex Burkhead and the Texans, I don't know if I'm comfortable. I guess Zamir's interesting to some extent because Jacobs has been a little bit of injury prone, but he's played a lot of games even though he's been hurt. It would be more like I'm staying away from that spot. So before we transition to the wide receivers, let's get another word from our sponsors, Vivid Seats. Hey, football fans, get your jerseys on, your tailgate snacks ready. I'm really ready for that. But that's week 2 for the Packers. That's right. NFL season is back, and so is your chance to score tickets with Vivid Seats. Download the Vivid Seats app or visit vividseats.com to see your team's schedule, compare tickets, and secure your spots in the stands. As the only ticket company with a reward program, Vivid Seats is the winning app for NFL fans like you. Earn credit when you buy 10 tickets, then cashed in to catch more games all season long. With tickets from Vivid Seats, you'll go watching the game to being a part of it. Go to vividseats.com or find us in the App Store to browse unbeatable seats. We'll see you in the stadium. I love to hear that. It's going to be exciting. Let's move over to the wide receivers.
This one was a little thinner for me when I was putting this together.
You must have been talking to our head honcho, Shannon, who is driving this Titans train in particular. I'll let you go in further detail with this.
So there are 2 receivers here that are interesting. Robert Woods, of course, he was taken in all these drafts here, but we're trying to look at the wide receiver 2 for Tennessee, and it was a very complicated situation. Really, it was Treylon Burks that played the most during the preseason. He was out there a ton. He got a ton of reps. He managed to come through all of this healthy, but then you have to think, is it a good sign that he's playing in the preseason, or is it a not so good sign? Behind the scenes, people seem to be talking a ton about Burks and making him a ton of hype, and he's only 46% rostered on Yahoo leagues right now. I got him as a $4 player in Stake League, which is a 14-team league. I got him as a $2 player in a 12-team possible keeper league, or who knows, maybe I could keep him for that next year if he breaks out. I've heard tons of Burks hype, but there are 2 sides of this narrative, of course, here. If we think that he'll be eased in and maybe not really break out until later in the season, the guy that's left to start as the number 2 player is Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. And he has shown at times that he is productive. He has been useful in the red zone. He's 25 years old. He's, as of our note just yesterday, he's listed as the starter alongside Robert Woods on the unofficial posted depth chart. And then, of course, then you have Burks right up there at number 3 here. So, Westbrook-Ikhine, undrafted free agent out of Indiana. Like I said, 25 years old, 6'2", 211. He's a guy that, again, is not going to turn into some league-winning type of pick. Like, who knows? Maybe Burks could be, or at least be very helpful. I think Westbrook-Ikhine is potentially startable in a deeper format in week one, whereas Burks is someone that you should absolutely watch. If you don't need to start a wide receiver 3, I'm picking up Burks and hanging on to him for a couple weeks to see if he can emerge. If I need an emergency start option week one, I'm going Westbrook-Ikhine.
Real quick, Jake, without looking, can you name the second wide receiver for the Falcons? So it's Kyle Pitts and Drake London. Who's next?
It ain't Russell Gage anymore.
Nope.
Oh boy, yeah, I probably
Brian
can't.
Edwards, the former Raiders third-round pick, is now your starter wide receiver opposite of Drake London.
So I see where you're going here.
No, so I mention this because just because you're starting doesn't mean you're good or we care.
Mm-hmm.
We might have Westbrook-Ikhine listed as the starter for the Titans. He might end up playing 85-90% of the snaps. We had the same issue with Jalen Guyton for the last 2 years doing this podcast. Oh, Jalen Guyton's playing 95% of the snaps for the Chargers. You look at his box
There's
score,
always those anomalies.
1 catch for 18 yards. I'm not convinced Westbrook-Ikhine is going to be that guy that you can comfortably rely on, even if he is listed as a starter. Deeper leagues, I understand it. It's the same reason you're not interested in Brian Edwards, even know who he might be. I like the Burks play, and especially in your keeper format, where you can get him cheaper like that. That makes complete sense to me. There's upside with Burks.
Yeah, the whole narrative where you need until the third season as a rookie to really break out has been shattered by guys like Chase and Justin Jefferson, who are now the top options before their third season. So it is possible to get some of these guys going. But if you don't want to mess around with that Titans offense, and I can very much understand why you might not, there are still some players that are around the 40% threshold that might be worth a look here. At least startable guys that I feel like will get you a few catches here.
I love all these names here. At least I feel a few of them.
Again, now Jacoby Myers takes some heat. He's not necessarily a league-winning player or a flashy pick when you're getting him in the double-digit rounds, but Jacoby Myers is 41% rostered. All suggestions seem to think that he has good chemistry with Mac Jones. It's their second year together. He's not a touchdown guy, obviously. He doesn't score. I don't know if people are expecting any kind of positive touchdown regression, but he is a possible PPR beast, and I have got quite a bit of Jacoby Myers. The one issue is that he has been dealing with a little bit of a leg injury. We're going to see on the injury reports, what happens and where he's coming out this week. But, Jacoby Myers, and then you're looking at Devontae Parker, Kendrick Bourne, Nelson Aguilar on this depth chart, a couple of solid tight ends here. But I think Myers is the guy that will lead the Patriots in receptions by the end of the year. And, we know a history of, players who lead the Patriots in receptions being PPR beasts. So I think Myers is being definitely a little bit undervalued.
So I don't know if it's Myers necessarily, because the talent I completely get. We mentioned this last week, though. Who's your offensive coordinators for the Patriots this year? It's a combo of Matt Patricia and Joe Judge.
Yep.
And we've had historically bad beat writer comments, not just for 1 week or 2 weeks like it was for the Joe Burrow Bengals last year, but the entire preseason long as Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, again, the offensive coordinators for the Patriots, are trying to implement a Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay scheme. Jacoby Myers is really talented, and you have to catch passes in the NFL. Like somebody has to. But that's my reservation. It has nothing to do with the talent of Jacoby Myers. It's everything to do with Matt Patricia and Joe Judge. As, again, I will repeat for the third time, offensive coordinators for the Patriots. It's crazy.
So to me, the floor is you cut him after a couple weeks. The ceiling is he's this year's Hunter Renfrow. Okay. And that's probably a pretty bold statement. But, this year's Hunter Renfrow, obviously you saw what happened to him next year in drafts. I think that the way Bill Belichick manages his organization, micromanages, if you will, if he starts to see cracks or he starts to see these things slipping, he's been doing this long enough that he's going to find a way to get it correct.
I think he's been doing it too long. That's the issue. That's how Matt Patricia and Joe Judge are coordinators.
All right, we're going to just have to agree to disagree on this. And yes, go to Jarvis Landry.
I was going to mention all three. So Jarvis Landry, Sky Moore, and Mecole Hardman all are in the 30 to 40% roster rate at the moment. Jarvis Landry, obviously new receiver for the Saints. We mentioned Jameis Winston earlier as a top pick of a quarterback going against the Falcons. That's an interesting name if Winston's looking in the slot. Then there's Sky Moore and the Mecole Hardman problem. One of those two probably is going to pop off.
Mm-hmm.
Jake sure hopes so because he's been triple doubling down on the Chiefs offensive stack, but we don't know which one is going to actually do that. So what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so this is I had a lot of personal applicable lessons here, on my own teams that I can kind of share here. So there are several leagues, in deeper leagues especially, where I've drafted Sky Moore as my third most expensive, or my third receiver period in the draft, and then ended up taking Jarvis Landry as a $1 player or someone at the end. Week 1, I'm actually starting Jarvis Landry first because I have more confidence in the volume there. I don't, we had this conversation about the Chiefs' third receiving options not being historically great. And I want to just see how the target share, splits out here, because it could easily be a situation where it's Marquez Valdez-Scantling, it's MVS heavy early on in the season, and then Sky Moore kind of starts to get going as things go on. Now I have, exactly. And I've got enough Sky Moore, not ready to cut bait with him after the first couple weeks, but in Stake League in particular, for example, I'm starting Jarvis Landry over Sky Moore because I think it's a little bit safer week 1, and I'm not expecting huge blow up games, but I'm going Jarvis Landry. And if your receivers, again, this is kind of a theme we've been talking about, if your receivers are all set in your lineup for week 1, then go ahead and grab Sky Moore just for the long-term upside. He's someone that you absolutely want to take a look at. I'm less high on Mecole Hardman. I think we know what we're getting out of him at this point, and would much rather roll the dice on a bench spot with Sky Moore.
Yeah, I'm not going near any of those guys, but more power to you if you want to make that upside play, especially for Sky Moore, I think.
I mean, what if you drafted Tim Patrick, in a deep league? Or what if I don't know. I mean, I took John Michie in I hope his situation, he gets well. I took him in a 14-team league. These are some guys that, you may or may not.
As wide receiver 3s though?
No, absolutely not.
I mean, I
mean, these are guys that you absolutely want to, just don't carry dead weight on your roster, man. I'll say this a million times over the year. You might think, oh, I have my starting lineup, I don't need to worry about fab this week. Yeah, you do, because that's how leagues are won and lost. And never having any dead weight on your roster is a huge part of that. If you auto-drafted and have a second kicker or a defense, if you took Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, one of those top 5 quarterbacks, and are sitting with a backup quarterback, you don't need to be having that on your roster.
I will defend to the day that I think having 2 defenses is fine. So how dare you lump that one in there?
Maybe we'll get this towards the end, but the only way you can have 2 defenses if you're in the playoffs and you're looking ahead to the next week and you can stomach it and the roster can stomach it. There are very rare situations where that is okay. And we'll probably argue about that forever. But a couple more names here.
Yeah, B has a question actually, and I think this kind of ties into a little bit what we're discussing. So I would assume it's 3 waiver wire wide receivers to pick up. Of these 3, Isaiah McKenzie, popular slot option for the Bills after the Cole Beasley cut. You have Josh Palmer, also popular third wide receiver for the Chargers. And then KJ Osborne, who has really climbed up, I think, a lot of people's pickup rankings over the past 2 or 3 weeks as the Vikings have solidified him as their third wide receiver after Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. Of those 3, Jake, is there one that you like more than the other?
Yeah, there is one. Now, again, I put KJ Osborne on here as an 11% rostered player and as somebody that can possibly have a breakout season here. I still think there's room for a third kind of big play guy. And then, if something obviously were to happen to the 1 or 2 guys, then he would suddenly, be a top option in Minnesota. But I think the guy that I like the most out of this group, and I'm going to trust, because again, we're talking wide receiver 3s here, right? Mm-hmm. The guy I'm going to trust the most out of this group is Isaiah McKenzie. And we'll see what happens with Jamison Crowder. Now, part of that is crowdsourcing. McKenzie is 52% rostered in Yahoo.
That one's surprising to me.
Yeah. Someone took McKenzie in my 10-teamer last night, too. He's getting a ton of hype. And I mean, I personally like Gabriel Davis. I didn't like the price he was at this year necessarily, because after Diggs, there's, it's closer than people think. And I think that's being reflected in the market right now with Isaiah McKenzie here. I would go with Isaiah McKenzie. I don't necessarily know I'd start him week 1 against the Rams, but I think he might be the best one to start week 1 out of that group and the best rest of season out of that group. Just depending on, I mean, we'll see how things go. He's got to pretty much beat out a veteran in Jamison Crowder. And I think, I don't know. Isaiah McKenzie had stretches that were similar to Gabriel Davis's hot stretch at the end of last year. McKenzie's just happened earlier. So we know it can happen. And just on that chance that the market was wrong on Gabriel Davis, which I don't think is quite the case, but enough to hedge with the McKenzie pickup when faced with those other options.
So I would cheat. Honestly, if you're asking me this question, I would say go get Warren, the backup for the Steelers, or one
course.
of the. Well, I think the running back position is more valuable than wide receiver 6 or 7, which I think all three of these sort of lump into.
Mm-hmm.
I lean towards Osborne of the three. If I had to pick Josh Palmer, Isaiah McKenzie, Osborne, only because I see such a narrow funnel for the Vikings offense, and by default, somebody, a fourth guy, right? I think fourth being Irv Smith is 3, Jefferson and Thielen are 1 and 2.
I'd almost put Delvin Cook ahead of Irv Smith.
Okay, but even still, like
so we're looking at
I'm thinking
guy.
Pascal. Okay, sure. There has to be somebody that develops in the Viking system. I would have thought last year we mentioned it, Amir Smith-Marset. Well, he got cut, picked up by the Bears, but he's not there. So like Osborne really has a clear runway. I think the Chargers have a lot of different things they can do offensively, and while Palmer's going to play, I don't know if he gets a lot of targets. Yeah. The same thing happens for the Bills too, and you factor in Singletary and James Cook and Dawson Knox. There's a lot of different ways in which they could beat you, and that doesn't include Josh Allen running. So that's where I go with Osborne.
To put it in as few words as possible, I'm selecting between 3 wide receiver 3s. Even if I didn't see the names, I'll take the one on the best offense in possibly the entire league. Though the Chargers, close. They might be sneaking up on them.
Yeah, they certainly might be. Of those 3 receivers, I would actually bench all of them for whoever ends up starting for the Packers. And I think it's important to outline this because we don't know.
This is a mess.
This is a complete
Joe
mess.
and I are, you can hear us be homers on this show all the time, but I could not tell you, right now I could not confidently tell you who's going to get the most reception. Well, I mean, Lazard, but of course, Lazard, the whole reason this conversation comes up
we don't know if
is because Lazard, we don't know if he's going to play week 1. He was working off to the side, I believe, yesterday. And and then that leaves us with a very convoluted stretch of players and that have all had, positive, that have all had different narratives going on. I mean, Sammy Watkins should be the best one on paper, the most experienced. As of right now, we'll see in 24 hours, but as of right now, he's not injured. And we'll see if he can make it through week 1 into other games. Randall Cobb obviously has trust with Aaron Rodgers. Romeo Doubs has gotten more looks this preseason and has been all the hype guy. And Christian Watson now apparently looks like he might be healthy. And he's got Rodgers saying how he brings a whole new different dynamic, different type of receiver than he's had before. And interpret that how you will. So the ownership distribution actually has Dobbs at 32%, Watkins 21%, Watson 10%, and Cobb only 4%. I disagree with that. I think if I had to start one of those guys week 1, it would probably be Watkins, but man, I don't feel great about it.
Okay, so I'm not really in a pinch, but I'm trying to do what you're doing. I'm mentioning like let's any loose pieces in my roster, I want to make sure I'm churning them through. And I think Randall Cobb is actually kind of interesting in this specific scenario. He's the one that Rodgers has the most confidence in by far. You think about this specific match against the Vikings, that pass rush should be pretty good. It's a hostile environment in Minnesota. I don't actually think anybody of these guys is going to do that well, but I think Cobb is the safest. Like if you really in a full point PPR league had to say, hey, who's going to give me 10 points? I think I go Randall Cobb. However, Jake, I'm willing to do this right now. Our very first official Culver's board bet.
Yeah.
I think Sammy Watkins outscores Jarvis Landry in points this week. What say you?
It's really hard to take the bet on that because we have no idea about Lazard. I actually think I would agree with you in this situation.
Even if Lazard plays, I think Sammy Watkins outscores Jarvis Landry. And again, I think the Packers struggle in Minnesota. This is more than I think Jarvis Landry is just all sorts of bad. Watkins, when he's healthy, is going to play. I think he's clearly the opposite outside receiver besides Lazard. It's a matter of what kind of runway he has and how long he stays healthy.
And people, I think, just automatically underestimate Watkins because he came into the league when he was 21 years old in 2014. This is his age 29 season here. He's not quite on the wrong side of 30 yet. Obviously, health and injuries have been an issue throughout his career, but this will be now his 1, 2, 3, 4. This will be his 5th season playing 10 or more games at least. So he's out there a reasonable amount, I guess. Will you bank 16 games? Absolutely not. That hasn't happened since his rookie season. But he's
week 1, Sammy's always the high scorer too, right? He did the
exactly.
Chiefs. He did
and you could do you could do the whole Steve Smith thing where you pick him up, he goes nuts week 1, you ship him, you sell high right away. So that's another reason to maybe take a look at it.
I like Sammy Watkins, and the other part of this too for the Matt LaFleur offense is he wants run blocking wide receivers. It's why Lazard always played last year, even if he wasn't getting targets. Sammy Watkins was the 7th highest rated run blocking wide receiver by PFF standards. I don't like PFF all the time, but when it helps my narrative, I will roll with it.
That's a great angle to look at. I hadn't even considered that. So that's not what I think of when I think of Sammy Watkins.
I wouldn't have either, and that's exactly why I memorized it. It's like, oh wait, he's actually a good run blocker. Well, that fits perfectly, and it makes sense why the Packers identified him out of all those other veteran wide receivers to go ahead and target earlier this offseason. I like him if you have to really struggle. You're probably losing your week 1 match if you're playing Watkins at all this week. That's the one I would go over really any of these other names that we mentioned here.
Yeah. I might actually, in a 14-team league that starts 2 flex spots, I may or may not end up starting Watkins. It's going to be between – I've got to pick 2 out of the 3, like McKissick, Kenneth Gainwell, and Sammy Watkins.
Watkins would be my choice.
Yeah. Yep. And right now he's in there, but over Gainwell, I'm taking McKissick and Watkins, but – that could always change here in these next couple of days.
Any other wide receivers you feel like we should mention, Jake?
I threw Michael Gallup on the list. That's kind of a hold, 35%. If wide receiver 2 there is Jalen Tolbert until further notice. This Cowboys offense.
Can we outline the Gallup situation? Because this is important. So we thought Michael Gallup was going to miss time until November. And then, he'll at least miss the first 4 weeks. The Cowboys didn't even choose to put him on the pup list.
They didn't put him, so that means he'll be back before 4 weeks.
He's available to play before 4 weeks. I love this pickup if you have leagues that you can stash injured players on.
You'd be injured perfect IR guy.
That's a great scenario.
I'm actually going to look at that right now. Super League.
Let's see. When I shouldn't be. But
no, you're not in this one. I'm just looking on a Yahoo League. I only have one league that does injured reserve there.
The Gus Edwards is the same way too. Like if there are leagues that you can stash these players in injured reserve, Gallup is by far my preferred choice at 35% roster. I think that's a fantastic name, and that he's going to be back before 4 weeks. That's a huge deal because Jalen Tolbert has not impressed thus far for the Cowboys, based off what the beat reporters have been saying. They have tough matchups, but Gallup's going to miss this first one. I like him a lot if you are in a league that can stash injured players.
Yeah. And like I said, there's been in this similar offensive scheme, there's been room for a productive wide receiver too. When Amari Cooper was around, CeeDee Lamb and Gallup were both useful at the same time. So definitely worth looking at there. I threw just real quick Rondale Moore on this list. He was surprisingly low.
I like him too.
And, he could be – he's a gadget guy that could get used in unique ways. Plus, DeAndre Hopkins is suspended, so he could be someone. He's someone that I took with late round flyers in either leagues that are keeper leagues or leagues where I had Kyler Murray just to hope to get something out of that stack. And Alec Pierce from the Colts. Kevin Payne just mentioned in his waiver wire article. He does the written version of this for RotoWire every week. He was talking about just how injury prone Paris Campbell tends to be, which might leave by default Alec Pierce, the wide receiver 2 behind Michael Pittman. And again, we'll see with this offense. This will be one of the more run-heavy offenses in the league, so we'll see if a wide receiver 2 can flourish in that offense, but Alec Pierce might be someone to maybe take a peek at.
I took Rondale Moore around 10 in my beat Joe Bartel NFFC a couple weeks ago. That was like a tremendous pick for his ADP at the time. I still feel pretty good about that, even with Marquise Brown returning to health. That was kind of my thought. Well, if Brown's out, Moore's going to have even more runway. But this is more because DeAndre Hopkins out for the next 6 weeks.
Again, more banged up, but he came back to practice. Only 29% rostered.
Yeah, I think both of those make complete sense and are ones that are more long-term plays. Before we get to the tight ends and everyone's popular waiver wire pick by Isaiah Likely, let's get a word from our sponsors, Monkey Knife Fight. Football is officially back on Monkey Knife Fight with all the NFL action you're looking for. And if college football is more your speed, you got plenty of that too. On Monkey Knife Fight, there's no sharks, no salary caps, and no math. It's just easy to play, easy to win, daily fantasy player props. Join now at monkeyfightknife.com and you'll get your first game free. Then use promo code RWNFL to get your first deposit matched instantly up to $100. So what are you waiting for? Join Monkey Knife Fight today and get that $100 deposit matched instantly. I mentioned it, Isaiah Likely. It's been a very popular waiver wire pickup because he's had an outstanding preseason. And as we know, it's Mark Andrews, Rashad Bateman, and what else for the Ravens offense?
Exactly.
Can you outline the situation for us more with Isaiah Likely?
Yeah, the thing is the Ravens put a depth chart out, and they even threw Nick Boyle there at number 2, but I think of him maybe a little bit more as a blocker, he gets that veteran presence here. The Ravens are a team, I mentioned the Colts being one of the more run-heavy teams by nature. I think the Ravens will be right up there in terms of, teams that are slanted towards the run on the run pass percentage. And the Ravens like to use a lot of 2 tight end sets. And that's really the only reason that puts tight end 3, I guess, on the depth chart in play. Likely was the preseason darling. He was taken as a dollar player in a 12-team redraft auction I did this weekend, which might be a little bit aggressive, but at the same time, if you did a 2 tight end league that drafted really early, he probably wasn't on the radar. Or if you have, if you're not so sure about your tight end position, you might want to think about him. I think Zach Ertz is a little bit banged up. If you took him, who I like, the whole season, if he's a little bit banged up and you need a plug and play, he could be an option that you look at here. I'd waver quite a bit on starting him week 1 until we see what type of snap count he's going to get, what type of route run percentage he's going to have. We have all those stats.
That's Jerry
on RotoWire.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. We'll see his article soon, but he seems to be the hottest tight end pickup that I put down. But there are a couple more guys that may or may not be worth a look.
I just want to specify that's a mistake. Like I think the Isaiah Likely hype is way too incredibly high right now in dynasty and keeper leagues. Fine, like maybe you could stash him for $1 or whatever.
Is he the Marquez Callaway of
that's a great comparison, and even more so at tight end. I think
at least he didn't get bumped up to like the 8th round.
We're also thirsty to find the next big thing at tight end. And I'm just telling you guys, there isn't one. We haven't seen Likely do this workload with Lamar Jackson, which I think is uniquely important in the scenario.
Oh, yes.
But just because they only have Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman doesn't mean there is going to be a third guy that pops up. The Ravens offense is uniquely suited for Lamar Jackson's rushing ability. So I'm not convinced that Isaiah Likely is anybody that, even like in a 14-team league, like fine, last pick, whatever. I'm just not.
It might have to be a 2 tight end league.
It really is.
Which I think, is Scott Fishbowl 2 tight ends?
Yeah, Scott Fishbowl's got a lot of stuff with it.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. But yeah, 2 tight end leagues I've seen pop up. I know the old Stopa league they used to draft, that was 2 tight ends for a while. But there are a couple other more mainstream names that we can entertain you guys with. Robert Tonyan. Did everyone forget about Bobby T or Baby Kittle? I remember we had the great nickname debate of like 2020 because he missed all of last season. You never know what you're going to get with a guy like him coming back from injury, and he's not even guaranteed to play week 1, but I actually like him as a possible tight end stash here. We mentioned obviously there's no Devontae Adams in Green Bay this year. There is a 4-pack of receivers with 2 rookies that we really don't know how it's going to shake out. Rodgers, when he's had a tight end, has used the tight end, and at least there's some chemistry with Robert Tonyan in the past. He's only 22% rostered. I think we have to think of him. A couple other more mainstream names. Remember when Logan Thomas got that big contract from the Commanders and then he got hurt and then everybody forgot about him? He was a very viable tight end at one point. We'll see what happens coming back from injury, but he's only 7% rostered. I mean, there are names out there if you punted tight end at this position, this year, and it's starting to make me regret all the Kelsey exposure I got here towards the end. I was pretty much on Ertz or Kelsey. I did not get as much pits as I would have liked, but that's me personally. So Logan Thomas still has an injury tag, knee designation, uncertain for week 1. So it's a similar situation with Tonyan. And then, of course, I think people underrate Noah Fant a little bit. Obviously, Geno Smith's throwing him the ball. He got moved over with Locke in that trade here. Before Kyle Pitts came into the league, everyone kind of had a similar outlook on Noah Fant, a wide receiver build, incredibly athletic. There were some drop issues with Denver, of course, but he showed some pretty good games even with Drew Lock. So I think he could be a guy that easily emerges as a tight end people pick up, but why not get him right now for 0 if you can afford the roster spot? And then, I know touchdown only leagues exist, and I still think that Mo Alley Cox, maybe this is my college basketball editor in me, but Mo Alley Cox, a former, I believe it was a VCU rebounding stud, he can go up and get rebounds with the football in the corner of the end zone and score some touchdowns. He'll get a few. I bet you he'll score 4 or 5 touchdowns, maybe more for the Colts this year.
Yeah, I'll be really interested to see what the Colts tight end playing time is because everyone assumes it's going to be Mo Alley Cox. And maybe that is the case. They did draft the athletic freak in Jelani Woods in the 3rd round. He did not have a great training camp, but I think when you're saying, hey, let's get the 6'5" guy that runs a 4.55 40 at 270 pounds on the field. I think it's actually 6'7".
Kyle Granson was a 4th round pick.
He tore his ACL. He's out. Sorry.
Kylan Granson.
Ogletree. I'm thinking of Ogletree.
No, yeah. Kylan Granson was just
I was going to mention Granson.
He did play in all 17 games last year. So yeah, he could definitely play a little bit. I think he's the starter
technically over Mo Alley Cox.
The one missing piece of my dynasty team is tight end, and I'm rostering 5 tight ends right now on our 20-man roster.
One's Noah Fant too, right?
Yeah, one's Noah Fant, and then I've got Henry and Jonnu, and I got Josiah DeGuara, Tanyan's backup in Green Bay, and of course Kyle Granson. But they're obviously going to be some of my first cuts if I need a guy.
Yeah, I think Granson actually will be a really interesting case if he plays more than Mohawk Hawks. But from a touchdown perspective,
do you want to trade for him with a couple of first-round picks?
I would like in there to not make any deals with you whatsoever. Your team is already too good, and I already hear about it too often. So no, I will not trade with you in your dynasty league at all.
What if I throw in? I'll never mention it on the show again. As part
that
of the deal.
actually might be worth as many first-round picks.
All right. See, now we're wheeling and dealing. You can always make the circumstances go in your favor here.
Let's talk real quick kickers or defensive pickups. You know me, I've been targeting the 49ers in weeks 1 and 2 and Steelers 3 and 4. I'm set at defense for the first 4 weeks because my strategy works, Jake. But if you weren't going my strategy and having 2 defenses, what would you go with?
Yeah. Funny enough, I actually took the Bills a little early in a 10-teamer last night just to get the top of a tier. But anyway, we're looking at streaming defenses. This is a show. I think you and I are both on team not kill kickers, but team no kickers. I guess I took that a little over the top, but team no kicker. And we think, IDPs are probably superior to defense, but we realize that having kickers in defense is the default on most sites and most people's favorite way to play here. So, kickers, I always think of the highest team implied total that's indoors. Easy way to pick up your kicker every week. You don't need to go too deeper than that. But defenses actually might have a little bit of skill. So you throw out a few of them. I think the Bengals against the Steelers and Mitch Trubisky, they could be productive. They're under our threshold. The Titans get Daniel Jones at home. They're only 37%. They're decent. And I also don't mind the Browns against Baker Mayfield. That could be a defense that people are thinking about. Now, Jerry, in his streaming defense article, puts both the Panthers and the Browns in his top 5 here. I'm interested to see
That is interesting.
That is very interesting. Yes, low-scoring game here. I mean, the team implied total is it's like the Panthers 22, the Browns 19. And I guess some of those rankings have future weeks to go. I guess I don't know. Maybe I'd almost rather have the home team in that, but I think Myles Garrett has a chance to ball out. He seems like he's pretty angry and can make some things happen.
Well, that's the part of it.
Chances are you're starting the defense that you took first overall, or your first defense that you took, and you probably factored week 1 matchup when you were making that decision, especially if it was one of the last ones of the draft.
The Browns are going to be an interesting case. Defensively, they're really good. Myles Garrett, you mentioned, fantastic. What happens when you play with not one hand tied behind your back, but both? Because that is what Jacoby Brissett is going to be doing as your starting quarterback for the Browns for the first 11 weeks. I think that has to be demoralizing no matter how good defensively you are. Or this will be like the 2000 Ravens when they played with Trent Dilfer and won the Super Bowl and literally just carry the team into the promised land. I'm not positive how that's going to look. So that does it for us on the RotoWire NFL podcast. You know what? Hold on.
We got a lot of players today.
I was going to say we
got a whole lot of players today. Any news that we missed?
I don't think so.
I think we're clean.
Well,
I'm
Jake,
looking right now.
Real quick. Would you rather keep for the rest of the season Jerry Jeudy or Sammy Watkins? Pretty clearly Jerry Jeudy, right?
Yeah, that's definitely Jerry Jeudy.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then how about Rondale Moore or Isaiah McKenzie?
Oh, man.
This is rest of the season, so you're factoring in Hopkins coming back at some point.
Yeah, I think I just need to turn to my personal exposure to answer this and go with Rondale Moore.
I would think so, too.
I think there's a higher ceiling there.
I'm not positive. Like the question was kind of phrased funny. Like Judy's a 6th-round wide receiver. Sammy Watkins you can get in the 14th round or off of waivers. That's pretty clear.
I mean,
but I would take
only 21% rostered.
I would take Watkins over Isaiah McKenzie. So, I'll go Jerry Jeudy, Rondale Moore, then Watkins. I think Watkins, for however long he's going to be healthy, is going to be on the field enough, and by default, he's on the field. He'll be a target. That's fantasy relevance to me. I'm not convinced Isaiah McKenzie is the guy for us in that one. So, sorry, I just want to get to that question real quick before we sign off.
Yeah, I'm glad you got those in there. So.
All right, again, that does it for us in the Tuesday, September 6th edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast. Last one. Season starts Thursday. I cannot wait. We'll be doing this on throughout the rest of the season. So thanks, everyone, for listening.